right, so welcome everybody, thank you, and I'm just gonna give it right over. And please introduce yourself and let's get into it.
All right, well, I'm Jackie Sandberg. I am the Wildlife Program Manager for the Dane County Humane Society, and that's in Madison, Wisconsin. I am a Certified Wildlife Rehabilitator, CWR, which is an international type of designation for folks that have been in the wildlife rehabilitation field. And I also have my Master's in Conservation Biology and Sustainable Development related to rehabilitation research. So I'm super excited to give presentations. I do give this presentation a lot, so I might sound a little, formal because I do this, but I always like to start off my presentations by asking folks if they know what bird this is. It is an owl. You know what kind of owl?
I've never seen a
Must be,
real owl.
is it barred or horned?
It's neither, although it's really close. It looks like a barred owl, and it kind of looks like a great horned, but it doesn't have the ear tufts.
No.
Right.
This is a great gray owl. It is one of the probably rarest owl species we see in the state of Wisconsin, and we don't get them into our wildlife center often at all. This is actually the second one in our history that we had ever admitted, and this is from last year. I like to use it as an intro picture because it just kind of highlights the cool parts of our jobs as rehabilitators. I never want to see a great gray owl come into rehabilitation, but also it's pretty amazing to work with those species up close. This bird in particular was the sixth most southern recorded great gray owl in the state of Wisconsin last year, and it was rehabilitated after having a beak fracture. You will see a little piece of its beak off the top, and it had a wing droop, and its its levels of phosphorus in its blood was off the charts. So we had a whole lot of different things going on. Our vet team's working with this bird. But it was one of those great success cases where we got to release it all the way far up in Bayfield, Wisconsin, up north after it was successfully rehabilitated and got to band her. And so it's just a really neat bird.
Is there a little lake down there?
Yeah, there's little, they have the fuzziest feet, like all the feathers.
So he's up on that.
Yeah, he's up on this perch. We have these perches that we make, that volunteers make.
That white part isn't, that's not.
No, he's just kind of clinging on to over here, but
Okay.
they're huge. They have these beautiful, gorgeous yellow eyes. So just like to show this as a highlight. Come on, hi, coming in for the presentations. So yeah, it's one of those types of careers that not a lot of people know about or think about, but it's kind of a special career, and I've really enjoyed it in the last 11 years actually that I've been with DCHS. So this presentation is all about wildlife rehabilitation, what I do, a bit about the program. I've got an outline here, which is basically, what is wildlife rehabilitation in general, and why is it important in our community. We'll go through the wildlife rehabilitation process, so steps of what happens when an animal is taken in and all the way to the point of release. And then I'll mention some things about Dane County Humane Society's Wildlife Center. We are actually one of the closest rehabilitation centers to you. I think a little bit closer is Cooley region, so we have La Crosse. We work with them as another Humane Society partner that is a little bit closer. Their capacity for animals is a little smaller than the one at DCHS, but there's not very many people that rehabilitate birds. So we're the only bird rehabilitation center in all of southwestern Wisconsin. We also can go through some common wildlife calls and questions, and if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. And just ways to get involved with local rehabilitators, whether it's our center or others. I'll show you some maps about where some of them around the state are places you can access or go to or get information about. But we are definitely happy to be a community resource both in Dane County and outside of the county. All right, so wildlife rehabilitation, what is it? Who can do it and how is it funded? You guys want to help me out and see if you want to give me a definition of what wildlife rehabilitation is?
Try to take injured animals from the wild and rehabilitate them so they can re-enter?
Yes. Yeah. Basically trying to get them back up to full health because they're coming in with some sort of injury or sickness. And we have a formal definition we use from the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. That's our national kind of parent program that was started back in the 1970s, bringing rehabilitators from all over the U.S. together. They are just a really great resource for new people getting in the field. It's how we train to become rehabilitators is through the resources that they've created. And actually this year we hosted the national conference in Madison, which was really exciting. So for the first time after going to a lot of conferences, we actually got to host it, which I thought was pretty neat. But their definition is that it's to provide professional care for sick, injured, and orphaned wild animals so that ultimately they can be returned to their natural habitat. And it's also really important that they have natural habitat to go back to. So it's not just the rehab efforts, it's also trying to partner with other organizations that might conserve natural habitat so that there's not as much of a problem with human urbanization and conflicts with wildlife, which I'll talk about some more. But ultimately, we want to make sure that they can thrive and be successful in Wisconsin and around the world. So a really great place to look up some information if you ever need help or you want more resources. NWRA is great. And then a little bit about our center in particular, because everybody has their own mission, but ours is to promote the health and welfare of wildlife through rehabilitation. We do a lot of professional training, especially for up-and-coming new rehabilitators, and then a lot of public education, so that's why I'm here giving a presentation tonight. And of course, we believe the world's a better place for people and animals with humane, ethic, empathy, and appreciation for all living things. So those of us that are on staff at DCHS really do care about the wildlife and the animals that we are working with. So in the state of Wisconsin, you do have to have a license to rehabilitate wildlife. That's something that's pretty specific. The DNR, Wisconsin DNR, Department of Natural Resources, is who we obtain those licenses from. There's two different levels. There's a basic level and there's an advanced level. So it actually takes kind of a long time. But at the basic level, you have to pass an exam. You have to be able to tell them, yes, I kind of know what I'm doing with wild animals, which is probably a good thing. And we are partnered with a veterinarian. So I'm not a veterinarian. You know, I'm not going to be able to say, okay, great gray owl, you have a broken wing. Let's go, under surgery and fix that humeral fracture. I can maybe make that decision, but I can't actually do the physical surgery myself. So we're actually partnered together, knowing that there's a lot of, aftercare, there's husbandry, there's dietary and nutritional needs for that animal, where the veterinarian can prescribe medications, they can do the surgery. So we work together in a partnership, which is really important. So a veterinarian has to sponsor a rehabilitator for us to operate. We also have to have a facility, and protocols and inspections happen every year. We have a liaison from the DNR that looks over everything, makes sure things look good, our cages are up to spec. And then if you start off at the basic level, you have a sponsor. So there are 3 of us at the center that are sponsors in the state, so myself included. And it's 2 years of experience with a basic level license. And then we're required to have subcommittees, which means that we're training new people in the field. So it's like a mentorship program in our state where someone kind of knows a lot about wildlife, they teach the next generation, and we continue on. But this really applies to rehabilitation activities in the state, mostly applicable to like mammals, reptiles, other species. If you also want to work with birds, you have to have a separate permit through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And that takes 100 hours of experience over the course of a full year to obtain that license. And you can't get it until you're an advanced level license holder either. So it takes a long time to kind of get to this level. I feel really lucky at our center that we have 6 of us with basic level licenses, 4 with advanced, and 2 of us with U.S. Fish and Wildlife permits. So a lot of variety of animals is kind of the nice thing to talk about here because we can work with a lot of different species. So that's how we're able to operate. But there are some legal requirements I like to share in these presentations because we know that most folks don't have a rehabilitation license. So what do you have for your legal requirements? How many of you knew that you can only keep a wild animal for 24 hours before you have to get it to a rehabilitator? Did anybody know that? Mm-hmm. No. That's always a fun one. It's a very little known law, I think, in the state. But really the point of it is to get that animal to someone who's able to care for them appropriately by giving them the medical care that they need, the right kind of housing and nutrition, and it even includes veterinarians too. If you're a veterinarian, you don't actually have a license to work with wildlife. In the state of Wisconsin, you can provide supportive care, which is very basic, or in the case of an emergency, euthanasia services, absolutely, if that animal is critically suffering. But otherwise, 24 hours is about all you have, which is kind of tough when you live out in Viroqua where you might have to drive maybe an hour to get to any rehabilitator in our state. But the reason it's here is mostly because there are animals like this little crow over here. I like to use them as examples. They are incredibly smart birds. And at this age, when they're hatchlings, I guarantee you that the second you look at them, they probably know exactly who you are. And they will start to get used to people if they're in captivity with people too long. And what our goal is as rehabilitators is to get that animal admitted quickly and then pairing them up with others of their same species so that they can grow up with their own kind together. And hopefully we can reduce any risk of them thinking that humans are super friendly. So getting them as quickly as possible to that rehabilitator is important for their behavioral development as young ones. Otherwise, it's not legal to raise or care for wildlife without a license. And then you also can't disturb the nest of any migratory bird or take their eggs or feathers or nests. And that's all part of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And that's been around for a long time. But it's mostly just to help with bird populations. There's a North American agreement. Their populations have been declining for a long time in a lot of different species categories, so we're trying to help them out. And funding for wildlife rehab, sadly, there is nothing in our state that gives for wildlife rehab, so we do get our licenses through the DNR, but there's no funding available for rehabilitation efforts. But there's also no federal grants or other county allotments in general. So most rehabilitators are nonprofits, whether they work from a big center like ours in Dane County, or they work independently as a rehabilitator out of their home. So for a lot of people, it's actually like they have a full-time job and they might have rehabilitation on the side at home. Some people I know will, bring their squirrels with in a bag to work under their desk, and that it can happen. Sometimes it's a difficult kind of job to have, but ours is a larger nonprofit as part of the Humane Society, obviously. And that does also mean that we're highly dependent on volunteers because we love our volunteers. They help us out a lot. It's day in and day out care for these animals. We can't skip holidays or anything. They still need food and medications. So yeah, it's all pretty much through donations, which is fun. And the reason that we do wildlife rehabilitation, regardless, there's two different perspectives that I like to talk about. The first is from a social perspective, and we're really here to try to save the lives of animals who couldn't care for themselves. Any idea how often these birds are being fed in the wild by their parents when they're babies? Every 15 minutes is yes. We feed our baby hummingbirds every 15 minutes. We feed these little guys probably close to every 15 to half hour. So imagine that from sun up to sundown. And luckily with birds, they go to sleep at night, so we don't have to worry about 24-hour care. But there's no way that these birds would survive if their parent got hit by a car and was deceased somewhere, right? There's a difference between altricial young and precocial young. There are babies that are helpless when they're born and others that aren't. But regardless, if parents are affected, then it's our job in a lot of ways to help, if we can, intervene to hand rear those animals to the point of release.
What are those birds?
These little guys, actually, I think these are robins. I didn't really give a good look, but we see a lot of finches also. They kind of have a finchy look. They're right here with the tufts. We get, most commonly for our songbird species, American robins and house finches and mourning doves would be our top three. And yeah, we see high variety. I'll show you some pictures and some other graphs and things about what other species we have, but yeah, they're the most time intensive. And I have some videos as well. We are also here to relieve pain and suffering after traumatic injuries. So this is a fun goose here. As you can see, this was one of our geese from, was it last winter? We had 4 of them that were all housed together, but he had a really bad leg fracture and was able to be repaired. But obviously, if those animals, this goose actually in particular was shot. I think he had 6 different pieces of steel shot in him and a fractured leg. So, that bird's not going to be able to do much in the wild by itself when that happens. So really, it would have had a 0% chance of survival out in the wild, but somebody happened to come along and pick him up, which is really great. So now he got to live, which is wonderful. And we also are here to train the next generation of wildlife rehabbers. We give lots of presentations about different methods of wildlife rehab. We have a whole veterinary program with UW-Madison where their 4th-year vet students, their externs, are coming around in rotations for the entire summer to learn under us to become wildlife vets, which is super fun. And then we do a lot of public education and a lot of community service. A couple is our dangerous duo team who goes to re-nest owls. They're arborists that go up trees and put baby owls back in the nests every spring. So yes, great horned owls are kind of terrible about making nests. They don't make their own. They use other ones and they'll use it year after year after year until it just gets dilapidated and the babies just fall through. It's kind of funny. So we give them a new nest basket, and our volunteers are wonderful for climbing trees. All right, so that's from our social perspective. The other is from a scientific standpoint, and really the biggest thing I think we do is use wildlife as environmental indicators, especially when we're seeing things like toxicity and disease that might be running through a population. Any ideas of some that stick out in your mind that you can think of?
Avian influenza.
Avian influenza. It's happening all over the place right now. Mm-hmm. Any others that you can think of? Any diseases or?
Well, deer we have.
Mm-hmm. CWD?
CWD.
Yep. CWD, brain prion. I've got a crow up here. I think a West Nile virus is also another hot one that people are always tracking. Some years
or pesticides?
Yeah, pesticides actually. Yeah, we just have we had a student from UW Stevens Point who just did a study with our center and a center up in Antigo, Wisconsin. And the study was looking at neurological abnormalities in songbirds, and related to potential toxicities due to pesticides. And then, yeah, we also see things like lead toxicity is another big one that we see in I just had an eagle this week that was unfortunately very sad due to lead toxicity. His lead levels in the blood were off the charts to the point where they couldn't actually, our analyzer couldn't read it. So I'd be curious to see what the value comes back from the lab with, but we still see that as a big problem in our area.
Did you say that was from lead shot?
Lead shot. So lead shot is not banned except for waterfowl hunting, and so there's still a lot of lead in use. And if you know a lot of fishermen or anything, like lead sinkers, that can be a problem. I would say the sinkers tend to affect our geese and our waterfowl and swans. In drought years, when the water goes down, they're able to access the bottom of the lakes a lot easier, and that lead doesn't go away. Really cool case up in Anago, the Raptor Education Group. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but Marge Gibson gave a great presentation one year about a swan that they had come in, that they were able to recover a Civil War piece of lead, like a bullet from the Civil War, from that swan's GI tract. So it doesn't degrade really, and so yeah, it can cause a lot of problems in waterfowl, and then also like our birds of prey, eagles, for example, if they're eating off of gut piles left from deer hunting, for example. We also study population dynamics, so changes in natality, when the timing of babies being born every year changes. I think that's a pretty neat one, especially when we're thinking about climate change effects and other things that could be happening. As we see baby booms happen in March or in April or May, how with a long-term data set does that change for different species? We also study species ecology in a rehab setting, so knowing what their dietary needs might be, trying to research and help with research with that. And then we also monitor the species intake for the DNR and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Center. So just as an example, we've had a couple of bobcats in our wildlife center before. One year had 2 right in a row. One of them was successfully released after a scapular fracture was repaired, but that the DNR wants to know, where that bobcat was and where it got released and things. So it's kind of a cool iconic species. So we do have to give reports quarterly about some of the kind of more dangerous cool species. But they can look at those throughout the entire state and U.S. And then I would say that probably for me the most important one about wildlife rehab is helping from a conservation perspective, because you might get one individual species in, and let's say it's, that animal is a threatened or endangered species. That one single individual can be such a huge factor in low populations for breeding and genetics. So if you can get that one animal released after rehabilitation to go back out into that population, it really helps with their conservation. So just that individual can make a huge difference if there's only a few of them. All right, any questions so far? That's about why we do it.
It's a pretty good reason.
Yeah.
The turtles that were on that screen before, those aren't their eggs, are they?
Those are the little spiny soft-shell turtles. These are their eggs.
It almost looks like they don't
Those
fit.
turtles lay those big eggs?
No, these guys are hatching from them.
Huh?
They're hatching from them. They're about that big.
They crawled
like
out.
Quarter size.
Yeah, but they didn't. Those turtles right there
No.
did not.
No, the mom hatched from them. The mom was about this big.
Oh,
So she's a
God,
large one.
I was looking at that.
They're a soft-shelled egg.
Soft shell turtle eggs. They are by far my favorite turtle species of all the ones we get in, because they don't seem like turtles. They are, but they have these little long noses and they have floppy sides, kind of like a stingray, but they're not like a hard shell turtle like your painted turtle and snapping turtle. And they're super sassy, but I've got some fun photos on my phone if you want to see some extra ones later, but we hatch about 300 turtles a year out from our Head Starting program. We get a lot of adults that cross the roads hit by car.
Right.
And so if for some reason something happens to the mom, or if she can lay them in rehabilitation, which happens, we'll just take those eggs and we will put them in some vermiculite and put it at a static temperature, and we hatch all these babies out, and it's really fun.
So it's the turtle shell that's soft, not the egg shell.
Yeah, actually the eggshell itself is a lot softer than I think the snapping and the painted turtles are, but yeah, they do have a little bit of flexibility to them. They can dent really easy. But I think each of the turtles has kind of their own, depending on how much calcium is able to be produced to lay those eggs and stuff, it can be different, varying, and based on temperature and moisture levels. There's a lot that goes into that one. So our wildlife supervisor, Paige, is the one that does our turtle incubation program. She's kind of the expert on our turtle eggs, but it is a really fun part of the program, I think. And then we get to have people release tiny turtles in the fall, which is also a really fun thing for the kids too.
Did that just happen then?
Yeah, we did that,
Yeah.
yep, with our folks group this year, which was fun. Okay, so our organization at the Humane Society, we were actually founded back in 2002 as a program, so we're actually celebrating our 20th year anniversary this year, which is kind of neat. And we have 6 of us that are full-time permanent staff. We are all licensed rehabbers, like I mentioned, but most people think it's like, you know, day-to-day it's just the animals, but there's so much more that goes into being a rehabber. So, you know, we're doing volunteer management and fundraisers, soliciting, education, public relations. So it's not just all about like just going in to feed the animals every day. So there's a lot that goes into the program. But we also have our veterinarians, which are at DCHS, the shelter medicine vets. And then we also have our volunteer vets, which are now kind of merged because of the UW Wildlife Medicine program at UW Madison. So Dr. Shauna Hawkins was hired as our first wildlife vet, but it's to teach wildlife rehabilitation for veterinarians, which is really great. We also have our apprenticeship program. So this will be the 4th year that we have one person for a full year get to train to become a wildlife rehabber and to get a license. So that's the program that I run. And then we have our seasonal staff that help us during the busiest time of year. And baby season is April through October, and that's when we get all the tiny baby animals in, which is the busy time. We have our internship program, summer, fall, and spring interns, and a lot of them getting it for university credit or recently graduated. And then our volunteers are helping with wildlife caretaking, reception, like administration, and then also rescue and transport as needed, which is pretty great. So that's how our program is made up.
I have a very
Yes.
specific question
Go
that's
for it.
kind of weird.
Mhm.
I was just having this conversation with somebody on trying to figure out what like the cutest baby animal is and if you can even decide. Is there one that's your favorite that you perhaps see at the,
Baby mergansers.
I'm sorry, what is her?
A merganser, they're ducks, they're diving ducks, and we usually get a couple of them. We had maybe 8 of them this year. Usually see mallard ducklings and wood
Yeah.
ducks. And mergansers will sometimes co-brood with wood ducks, and occasionally you'll get a batch of wood ducks that has a couple of mergansers in them. And my gosh, they're my favorite, cutest baby bird, I
Alright.
think, just because they're very fluffy, but they have
Yeah.
just the coolest markings and stuff.
Well,
Then I'd
thank,
have to say the tiny turtles too.
Yes.
So,
well, thank you.
yeah. Baby foxes are definitely high up on that list as well. There's a lot
Yeah.
of cute baby
It's hard,
animals.
it's a hard decision.
It is a very hard one. You want to help me with the top 5 species? I think we've actually said most all of them at some point already. Any guesses?
Like the birds, the robins?
Yep, robins are on the list.
Okay.
Is not number 1 on the list though.
Squirrels?
Squirrels was not on the list this last year for a different reason, but yes, it's usually number 2 on our list.
Bunnies.
Bunnies, it's not number 1 this year, but you're close. I'll give it to you because we did just talk about ducks. Mallard ducks was actually number 1 this last year. But then we had our American robins, and we had our wood ducks, which I also just talked about. We had a huge duck year last year. Eastern Cottontail rabbit. And then normally squirrels would be the next one, but we actually had bats that beat out the squirrels this last year. Now, every year is very, very different. I will mention that like 4 or 5 years ago, this number would have been in the 800s. So like every year it kind of ebbs and flows with what different species, what the weather and temperature allows for baby booms. We have a very interesting dynamic of how many different species of each we get, but the most common things are ones that you're seeing probably in your backyards a lot. So, you know, you're thinking bunnies and robins, they're gonna have at least 2 batches of babies every summer, if not more. So that's why we tend to see a lot of them. And in Madison, we're in a lakes area. There's multiple lakes around us. The ducks are all trying to cross the roads. They get separated from mom. That's the biggest reason we get so many ducks into our wildlife center. They are fun to rehab though, and they're very successful. So, but varieties, spice of life. So we actually had 145. Hey, that was supposed to say 2021. We had 152 different species this in 2021, 145 in 2020. So we've had anywhere between 140 to 150 different species of wildlife in our center at any given year. So we also work with things like snakes. We have a decayed brown snake right now. We have fox and coyote. This year has been actually the year of the fox. We've had over 30 foxes admitted to the wildlife center this year, when normally we might have 1 or 2. So 30 is a lot. But yeah, it's kind of a little picture break for a lot of the things we're seeing. Here's little baby house finches. These guys are cute. All right. And then our growth as a center, when we started back in 2002 and into our first year, we only took 100 animals. And as you can see, there's been a lot of growth since then, but we typically see anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 animals a year now. That was our highest year, was just over 4,000. These 2 asterisk years are COVID-19 was the pandemic. That was a very difficult year. We just went to staff and interns only working. And then this year we also had HPAI, the avian influenza that was just mentioned. So that's been a very interesting biosecurity factor. But we are definitely right up there in those same amounts right now. So we haven't ended the year yet, but I think we're at about 2,400 animals right now. So yeah, it's a big program.
That equates to 10 a day.
Yeah, yep, and in the summer, I think, was it at most, the highest record, we had like 60 in one day. 30 is difficult, but when you get like, 12 wood ducks, 12 mallards, you get those add up really fast. So there's very much a growing need in Wisconsin. There's just unfortunately not enough rehabilitators to meet the demand of people finding injured animals or sick animals. So that's part of the reason that our program does so much with professional training and internships, just to try to get more people into the field and learning from hopefully a really good center that does veterinary medicine and wildlife ecology research. Our most common causes for admission are hit by car, window collisions, and dog bites and cat bites. That would probably be the highest ones. But we also get neurotic behavior, parasites, emaciation, meaning that they're starving, dehydration, and a lot of toxicity. So things like our turtles being hit by cars. This is a little crane baby that had swallowed a grommet because it was shiny. So, we get some pretty random things too. But it's nice because we have the capability to do x-rays and other things to figure out what's wrong with them. And lots of orphan babies. So there's your cute picture break for all the baby things that we get to see, which is great. We've been at times baby badgers. We haven't had baby badgers for a few years. Their populations are kind of low, but there's little cedar waxwings. We have a whole bunch of cedar waxwings just about ready for release because they're the latest fall baby birds that we get. So that's been really, really fun. And our biggest question, though, is are they truly orphaned or not? So we are ourselves, just as our little center, field 6,000 phone calls a year, which is a lot. We are always trying to figure out over the phone, especially first, does that animal actually need our help or not? Because there are a lot of cases where they don't. And I know the answer is already up here, but do you guys think those bunnies need help at all? Any chance?
Doesn't look like it. Pretty fat.
They're like the
I was
fattest
gonna
things I've ever
say,
seen.
they're like super
They're
plump.
wonderful. They're little plumps, little sumo bunnies. They're so cute. Their bellies are full, and sometimes I'll have the public just randomly maybe show up, even just ring the doorbell and say, hey, I found this box of baby bunnies. And I can look at them, they say, oh, mom's not been there for 3 days. And, I look them over and I'm like, well, their bellies are full, they were fed this morning, so, what's going on, what's the situation? So we do send animals back to do reuniting and re-nesting a lot, just to make sure, unless there's a really extenuating circumstance, which can happen. Sometimes, mom was actively feeding the baby bunnies, their dog attacked them while they were feeding, sometimes those rare situations occur, but most of the time, those babies are going to do absolutely the best with their parent, and rehab is not the best option for them. Baby bunnies are actually one of the hardest species to rehabilitate, which seems really weird because they seem like such simple little critters, and they are, but they have very sensitive tummies, so they're very difficult. So their chance of success it just drops dramatically in general in rehabilitation, especially based on whatever age they come in at, and these guys are still only about 2 weeks old. So best chances with mom, for sure, if we can get them back. So we're really saving space for those that actually need the help if they're, have a broken bone or a wound or something. All right, so the process, when we take those animals in, the first thing that we do is we admit them and we do a full assessment. So all of our staff are trained to be doing all of our physical exams, baseline blood work, ophthalmology, x-rays. We have full capabilities at DCHS, which is really nice just to do really quick and really speedy diagnostics. And we're trying to figure out, can this animal stay? Are we able to treat it? What can we do for it? And it's not always going to be a successful case. We definitely do our best to try to figure out, can we proceed with care, or are there so many things wrong with this animal that we feel, maybe humane euthanasia might be the most ethically responsible thing for this animal. And that's the hardest part of our jobs, absolutely. But if we're able to rehabilitate them, then we try to treat everybody, medication, surgery, wound care fluids. We have supportive care, we have cage rest, and that treatment phase actually could be anywhere from, a couple of days if it was a migratory bird that hit a window and it seemed like it was okay, it recovered, or it could be months. And actually, our favorite one, because I have to say this now, our Blandings turtle that was our longest ever patient was just released this month. It was in rehabilitation for 3 years, which we've never had before, but it was in a prairie fire, burned so fully that it took that long for the shell to regrow and to actually have enough calcium deposit to survive winter. And it was pretty amazing because they can live up to 30 years old or more. So, 60 years old. we think that this individual was probably somewhere in the teens to 30s, and they don't breed until that late of age, like 13 to 16 years old, I think. They're also a species of special concern in Wisconsin, so it was a really, really cool case. But you can read about it on our website if you'd like to. It's a special turtle.
3 years is a long time for
Yes.
them to be not in their native habitat.
Yes, and we do a lot to make it seem like they're in their native habitat, and they get to spend the entire summer outdoors, which is nice. So if you watch the release video that we have up, you can guarantee she doesn't like people by any means. She's a very angry, cranky turtle, but she did great. She went back right exactly to the conservation area that she was found in. And it was just like instant. She was like, oh, I know where I am, boop, and she was gone. So it was very, very cool. But we have to get an extension if it's anywhere after 6 months of rehab. So normally we wouldn't be able to do it. But turtles, their shells grow like your fingernails grow. It's that slow. So it takes a long time. So yeah, that treatment can be very intense sometimes. And once they feel better, so they're in a treatment facility, climate control, lots of good food and everything, cage rest. And when they're feeling strong enough and we feel that they're ready and stable enough that they can go outside, the sooner they can go outside, the better. And so we'll put them out into our flight conditioning cages for exercise. There's mammal cages, there's turtle enclosures, waterfowl enclosures. And so all of these, this is where we're doing evaluations as staff members to make sure, okay, if this animal had a fractured wing, how well is it flying after we've done physical therapy and other things? Or, is this animal running around normally? Is it able to climb? Is there anything we're seeing that's wrong? Can it find and obtain its own food? So all of that is really important for us to determine, is that animal ready for release at some point? And obviously that's the best part of the job, is getting to release those animals. And usually it's right back at the same spot they were found, especially if they were adults. And that's mostly because they might have a territory that's already set up in that area if they've been there a long time. And then a lot of our young species, we might do more of a soft release, kind of depends on the situation, but sometimes we'll add supplemented food to that area for a couple of days or even a week, just to make sure that they have something as they're getting acclimated to a new area, since they wouldn't have a territory yet. So that's what we very basically do, kind of from admission to release, which is a lot of fun. But it's even more fun when you get to see more pictures and some videos. So here's what we actually do. This is me and a couple of interns doing admission and assessment on red-tailed hawk. And this is our certified wildlife rehabilitator. Ooh, hold on a second. Looks like, let me plug this out. Sorry about that. This is our wildlife veterinary technician and certified wildlife rehabber, Erin Lumley, and she is working with the UW vets to do treatment on an owl. And we also have, my computer decides it likes me, flight conditioning. We do things like falconry techniques. This is called crayons. So for some of our birds that might need extra exercise, we can actually put them in like a tether line to fly them with a glove so that they can get enough exercise before release. And then releasing them, of course, which is super fun. Let's see if my videos will play.
Here it goes.
Okay, goodbye, bats. See you later. It's usually our biggest winter program is going to be bats. So, all right, and then we do things like 30-minute feeding. So here's very practically what we're doing. This is the every half-hour feeding stage for this grackle is about ready to be weaned, but not quite. They notoriously take forever. But you can imagine every half hour we're out there feeding their natural foods so that they can eventually become independent, and we start weaning them. Actually, this is the age where we probably have already weaned him to probably hourly or every 2 hours, but eventually they have to stop begging, and they do. And it's great because we can teach them how to, I don't want to say teach them, but we can offer them opportunities to forage on their own. Blue jays will actually start to cache nuts and stuff in the different enrichment that we add in the enclosures. So it's a really cool thing to be able to do, but we get a lot of different songbirds for sure. We also give things like supportive care and fluids. So this is a little gray squirrel that came in. We didn't take as many gray squirrels this past 2 years because of COVID-19, prioritizing birds and things, but we also have another rehab organization here in Dane County that does all of the raccoon rehabilitation and mammal rehabilitation for neonates. So Wisconsin Wild Care, they usually take these little guys, so we give them supportive care, we do fluids, and we transfer them to that group, which is helpful. And exercise is a fun one. This is my favorite possum. This is Mr. Big.
I was going to say he's junky.
Yeah, we have live cameras in the enclosures that we can, and trail cams as well. This one is a trail cam, but We don't normally put the wheels in for animals, but this poor possum came in very, very large. So we tried it out, and it worked quite well. So he was exercising on it every night, which gave him some mental stimulation also, which was fun. But yeah, he was a really very well-fed possum. But lots of exercise. And practice, this is a fun one. So this is a little screech owl here. If you can see, he's sitting up here, and this is the tub. This is the first time we are trying prey testing with this bird. I would say most of our raptor species come in with ocular trauma, so eye injuries. And so when we are getting to the point of testing them for release, you know, we have to know for sure, is that animal going to be able to survive in the wild? Can it catch its own food? So that's probably, it's one of the harder things to try to assess, but you know, we don't want them to go just be released and then starve to death if they couldn't catch a mouse. So for our raptors like screech owls, that's definitely something we would do. They start with a tub and then they graduate to the entire enclosure later. So we have like a staging of the testing. But it would be the same for like a loon if they had to catch a fish accurately before it went. So lots of different cool things that we're doing there.
What's in the tub?
A mouse, a small mouse, yeah. So for screech owls, they'll pretty much only exclusively eat small mice and then other things, sometimes like worms, earthworms and stuff. But in this particular case, we had to test with mouse. But if he had retinal damage or something and can't see in one eye, we want to make sure that he can still hear accurately to catch. So raptors are kind of a specialty for that. We don't do that with every species, but raptors, because they're strictly carnivorous and that's what they would eat. That is part of their prey testing. But then the best part, of course, I just had to add this one in there because this is fun. But freedom, happy eagle. This is one of our best videos, I think.
I was gonna say that is
at least.
That is a beautiful video.
We have a volunteer who's kind of really, really great at videography, and he does all of our release videos. So credit to Dylan Hughes for this one. Yeah, it's great. And then you can fly off over the horizon here. So, but it's a really great feeling to know that you spent a lot of time with those animals and you're able to do something for them. So the fun thing I am noticing here is that I wonder.
Did you say you try not to become friends with them?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that is a huge, huge deal for us to make sure that we aren't.
How do you keep from imprinting?
I apologize. I'm realizing now that my slides didn't save from the stuff that I had in here. That was for the different rehab locations, but I can bring that up in the end section. So sorry about that. Go ahead. Or say
How do you keep from imprinting birds?
So we have a couple of different techniques. One would be to try to put them with species of their own kind, which can be difficult if you don't have the right kind of parent. Some people have foster birds at their facilities that are, non-releasable birds that can take care of the babies. So up in Anago, for example, they have a foster bald eagle male that for I don't know how many years now, it's been many years, brings up all the eaglets, and he's just a great parent, surrogate parent basically for those eaglets. We tend to have to either transfer for those that do have fosters, or if we happen to have that same species that's in rehab, so like an adult great horned owl and we have a baby, if we had to keep that baby, we can put their cage inside of another cage if they'll tolerate each other, so they can't really interact, but they see each other all the time, so they get the same noises and like the vocalizations, which is great. We have visual barriers on all of our cages. We basically limit handling, and we'll even lock rooms depending, like our foxes. We had the room fully locked where only staff could go in, and it was only once or twice a day at the most to work with them. And then getting them outside as soon as possible to hear the natural sounds around them is really important. So they're starting to interact with the other birds that are wild on the property and stuff. And then we also have some puppets. So we do have like a crow puppet that we'll use. So we use face shields and puppets to feed them. Same with our raptors. We have a crane one that's really long. So. But yeah, so there's a lot of different methods that we use, but generally we don't talk to them. We don't want to have our site smell anything like that associated with like good things with people. Sometimes it even takes what's called humane harassment, which is, making ourselves look really big and scary to scare them away, because I want them to be scared by the time they're released, which sounds kind of sad, but we don't want them to be so used to people that there's a problem afterwards. So, good question though. We also do a lot of bird banding at our center, so we do band hundreds of birds every year, mostly songbirds, but also red-tailed hawks, and then some that have been, actually just recently, the UW Canid project that works with foxes and coyotes have put 3 GPS collars on some of our rehab foxes, so they're also looking at them after release to see where they're going in the area. But that's a really cool way to look at their migration patterns, their nesting success, how they're using natural areas. So it's a nice thing to be able to do after rehab, and maybe we'll get some information about how long they lived. So if you ever find a bird with a band, I always like to tell people, if you ever find one deceased, or if you see one, if you're out in the wild, if you're out doing photography and you find one in the wild, there is a number and a website through the US Geological Survey that you can use to report that bird band. It helps people like ourselves to know where those animals are going, which is great. All right, so some information about sick and injured wildlife. I'd like to talk about what you should do if you find an animal that is injured. The biggest thing is that if the animal is visibly injured, if you see any blood, if you see a cat or a dog bite, some sort of fracture, anything like that, that's going to be a reason to probably try to rescue that animal and get it admitted to a rehabilitator as soon as possible. So obviously there's something wrong if you're seeing any of that. We also have a lot of animals seen hit by vehicles or other moving objects. So whether it's car, bike, motorized yard equipment is another big one. So lawnmower accidents or weed whacker accidents. There might be something wrong. You'll probably also see other injuries. So that would be another reason to bring them in. If the animal's displaying abnormal neurological signs, which you want to be very careful about, and in our particular state of the US right now, and I shouldn't say just the US because it's coming from Europe and Canada's experienced it, but the highly pathogenic avian influenza virus is affecting mostly waterfowl and raptors and scavenger species. So waterfowl like ducks and geese right now carry the virus, and they can just seem normal, but they are able to pass it very easily to a lot of our other birds that might naturally eat waterfowl or scavenge on them. So we've found that bald eagles have been getting it, lots of different raptor species, pretty much all of them, cranes, turkeys, geese, geese, even foxes. We actually identified that foxes were getting it. That was one of the big things that we were researching this year. But that also means if it has an abnormal neurological sign, you probably don't want to necessarily pick it up yourself, or you want to make sure that you have safety equipment or someone that you might be able to have help you if it's police or something, just because it could be anything from rabies, which could be a neurological sign, to avian influenza, which can be transmissible to people. So you want to be really careful if you're helping an animal, but it does need help in some way. Did you have a question?
No, sorry. Listening intently.
No, it's good. If the animal is heavily parasitized, meaning they have fleas, ticks, fly eggs, basically if you're able to walk up to an animal and it's on the ground and you could pick it up and put it in a box, there's definitely something wrong. And especially if you see a lot of extra flies on them or other things, it means there's some other underlying condition that they're sick and they can't get away from you. So it's really sad to see, but it definitely happens. And if the animal has been trapped in an area for longer than 3 days and they look unhealthy, so if they were stuck down a window well or a chimney, sometimes raccoons in the dumpster, that kind of situation, they obviously haven't had any adequate food or water, so probably should get a checkout if possible. If the bird has struck a window, we do see a lot of migratory birds, especially in the fall and the spring, that come through and hit windows. So you guys ever had that actually here? I wondered, with a lot of glass, do you guys have any?
I think no, I don't think I've seen any
I
actually.
have it in my house.
Yeah, at your house?
Well, yeah. I don't
Anybody-
think here though.
That's good, because there are a lot of places, depending on, like, I know Madison has an initiative right now where all of UW campus is getting any new building being replaced has the frittered glass, which is little dots in the glass that the birds can actually see and realize that it's not glass to fly through. But yeah, it's common at your house too, especially if you have vegetation around your house, like a bush or trees. They'll see the reflection of that in the window and think that they can fly to it. So we get a lot of those birds that will unfortunately hit a window at that time of year, and we see a lot of shoulder girdle fractures and head trauma.
So is it roughly like if somebody, sometimes they'll hit it and they'll just get stunned for a moment? Is there a certain time frame of okay, if they've been there for so many?
We used to say about an hour or so.
Yeah.
If they can fly away, then that's great. I think we've kind of come back from that with more research showing that because it's such a small animal, especially songbirds that hit a window, they hit it sometimes with such a velocity that you might have a skull fracture that just could be 24 to 48 hours until those symptoms actually show themselves. So we recommend now, for the most part, that if you have them, I'd probably try to bring them in if possible. You can do the recommended method of let it fly away, but there's still a chance that there might be something wrong. And sometimes those birds will just hop out of your box instead of fly. So we really recommend, if you're gonna truly do that, use a tall garbage can that they can fly up and out of. Because if you use a little shoebox and that bird has a shoulder girdle fracture, they can still hop out of your box, and then now they're away somewhere in the bushes that you can't access them. So that just might be one other suggestion if you do, if you're like, oh, I definitely can't drive, 2 hours from Madison or an hour and a half to Cooley. But yeah, I think there's just more research is needed, I think, unfortunately, for window strike cases.
Yeah, no, I'm remembering someone brought a
Yeah.
bird into the library
Mm.
when I was working,
Uh-huh.
and we didn't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
So they found it out on the sidewalk out there,
Okay.
over in front of Western,
Yeah.
I think.
So that's where now you'll know you can
Yeah.
give us a
There
call.
we
Yeah, which is
go.
good. I do have our information and other things on here, and a line you can take. If you can take a photo of the animal before you capture it, if you do capture it, that is very, very helpful. For us, a photo is kind of worth 1,000 words, because then I can see it and I can tell you right off the bat if that animal's got a wing injury. Like this bird, if I got this photo, it'd be very easy for me to say that this left wing is injured for sure. So it takes me just a second, but if it, otherwise, and even just to figure out what species it is, because that can be very helpful too.
Yeah.
So I do have a number that I have here for you guys, and we also have information on brochures and stuff. You can take that with you if you'd like. And then also, if a baby animal has truly lost its parent, and that means that the animal has definitely, something has happened to the mom or the dad, and they're not going to survive without human intervention. So those animals that might need rescue, the biggest thing is that they might be dangerous to people, so you want to be careful. You can definitely visit our website, www.giveshelter.org, and that's our website. It's got a lot of information about how to contain different animals safely. Also information about how to reunite baby animals. And
Excuse me.
that's okay. A wild animal will always try to defend itself, and that's the biggest thing that I can probably relate to people. Know their kind of primary means of defense. So for a hawk, it's going to use its talons to try to grab you. A crane has a very long, sharp beak. We're wearing face shields when we're working with cranes. Snapping turtle, never put your fingers anywhere near the head or the front, because they definitely will grab and they won't let go. So definitely think about safety for the handler and for the animal. We always do appreciate that if someone is willing and able to get that animal contained, that helps us a lot. We do have volunteers that are more easily able to transport, like maybe potentially do it part way, halfway in between Madison type of transport, versus having to come all the way out here to capture an animal, because by the time they get here, that animal might have gone somewhere else. So if you're able to even do something like get a box over the top or a laundry basket over the top of that animal, that will make it a lot easier for whatever rehabilitator is helping with rescue. So otherwise, boxes, laundry baskets, the comforters, leather gloves, safety glasses, rubber gloves, all of those are really, really good and helpful for containing an animal if you need to. And for temporary housing, it would be good to allow the animal enough room to sit or stand in a container so that it's able to turn around. You don't want it so small that they're stuck. And we do suggest solid sides and something covered so that it reduces any sort of visual, stimulus around people, because that will stress them out. And having a non-slip bottom surface, usually some sort of towel or fleece or old t-shirt, works really well. And then holes for ventilation, but not big enough for them to escape. I have had that happen a number of times where people might transport. I think there's the funniest one was a weasel. There was a least weasel, it was a tiny little guy. And the carrier they had it in was not sturdy. And so they got here, it was from Sauk County, I think. And they drove and they presented the empty cage. So there's no weasel in here. And we eventually found it in the parking lot, but it was underneath their car. But we were searching the car very frantically. Bats are also good about escaping. So just a forewarning that, that, yes, make sure it's secure. Don't feed the animal, please. That's probably the one thing that most people, automatically kind of want to do is to feed that animal. But if this animal is dehydrated or starving, so if you see this little bunny here, he's in terrible shape. If you were to try to feed him right away with something that you would get at the grocery store, you can actually kill that animal just from doing that. So it sounds really harsh, but there's a lot of bad information on the internet about what to feed wildlife, and also if you do it too soon or in a certain way that would cause problems, then unfortunately they won't be able to survive. This little robin is one that came in with metabolic bone disease, so it was kept by the finders for multiple weeks before bringing it in, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, because it came in, or it started as a hatchling, but didn't get enough calcium in its diet, and so it had folding fractures in most of its legs, meaning that it was soft bones, which is not good for that animal. Also had problems with its feathers, as you can see. So there's a lot of specialized diets required for wildlife. And then if it is going to be a long time, like if it's going to be tomorrow when you might get the animal to us, Sometimes offering water is okay, but I would do that with caution. The animal should be able to stay upright in their box and not like have a head tilt or fall over. You wouldn't want them to fall into their water dish, get fully hypothermic, and potentially drowned or something. So just a small cap of water if it's going to be a while, if they can stay upright. And then some other special considerations that we like to talk about is that stress is the leading cause of death in wildlife rehab in general. These animals are not companion animals. So they're not your typical dog, cat, guinea pig or something. They think that we're giant predators that want to eat them, and they're very, very scared. So they don't know that we're trying to help them, unfortunately, which is probably the other hardest part of the job. So we do try to reduce stress as much as possible, but that also includes if you happen to capture wildlife. Even some animals are prone to things called capture myopathy. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that, but it's a stress reaction, especially cranes is what I think of if you were to chase a crane and it's a very long, kind of winded rescue attempt. They can actually stress so much to the point where they just collapse and then they're never able to use their legs again. It's something that becomes permanent. It's not something that happens super often, but it is a real thing. So we just tell people, try to make it quick. Don't talk to the animal, don't pet them like they're your pets, they might try to bite you. Avoid eye contact, provide visual barriers and reduce any noise that's around them. Definitely keeping handling to a minimum, especially if you have kids and other things too that might think it's the coolest thing, but the kid is gonna pass around the little squirrel a bunch of times, it's gonna be very stressful. And then try to provide as quiet of an environment for transport as you can, so we recommend turning the radio off during transport. And then it is just, we talked about this already, I think, but thank you for asking, the habituation to imprinting and tameness. If it has been too long and that animal has imprinted on people, meaning that they think that they themselves are a human, unfortunately those animals can't be released, and so the only other options end up being a sanctuary, education facility, a zoo, but that's kind of far and few between depending on the species of how you can or where you can transfer those to. So we really try to minimize that as much as possible. We want them to be wild. These are also pictures, when you Google rehabbing squirrels, these pictures come up on Google, which makes me really sad, because we don't put wild animals and domestic animals together, even if we're at a humane society, our buildings are separate. And we don't let the animals climb on us or anything, that just encourages them to think we're friendly. All right. So the admissions that we do have a toll-free number for the DNR. That is a number that you can use pretty much any of the days to provide with a closest license holder for any sort of species that you're finding. They also have a new wildlife hotline number, which I can get for you too. And that hotline number is even more specialized to some of the county biologists and wardens to potentially rescue animals in the field. Our wildlife center phone number is here. So we are open 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. And if you give us a call, we can at least give you some advice. We can offer you a chance to send a picture for any of the species. And then obviously the best chance of survival for an animal is if care is gotten quickly. So if you can find a rehabber to call, and most of the time you'll probably have to leave a voicemail with a rehabber. I should mention that too. Most of us don't answer the phone live because we get so many calls that we have to triage them based on severity sometimes. So don't be alarmed if you hear a voicemail message from any rehabber in the state. I think we all do the same thing. Just leave a message, we will get back to you, no matter who it is, pretty much. So just wanted to throw that out there because it's kind of been a recurring thing for a while. And then we understand that, of course, Madison is a pretty far drive, but if you're not able to, we still have some options with volunteers for partway in between sometimes. DNR might have a biologist willing to bring it. You can also check with friends, family members, neighbors, or sometimes local police departments. They will be willing to do some sort of halfway transfer. So I'm not sure if the folks, if you've had any experience with PD in Vernon County helping with that at all. But I know the biologists have brought us eagles many times. So I think if you call DNR and ask for a Vernon County biologist, you'll probably get them, which would be good. So if you live in Dane County, then we have a separate office service or animal service officer number, but I imagine that's a little far and more narrow for here. All right, and then I do have some common wildlife questions. How are we doing on time here? We are just about at the end, but I've got a couple of them that I think I'll share just really briefly. The first one is eastern cottontail rabbits, because that's the #1 phone call for species we get at our wildlife center. And most of the time, these are the questions we get. It's just, I found a nest of baby bunnies. I haven't seen the mother around all day. I saw a dead rabbit on the road last week. Does not mean that it's the mom rabbit. It can be the dad rabbit. There are two. I have a dog. He'll eat the bunnies is probably the #1 call that we get about for sure. And then folks that are worried because there are stray cats or foxes or coyotes in the area, which would naturally predate on baby bunnies. and also that they will eat your garden, which definitely is also another thing. But you can do, little low-lying fences around your garden areas, or even pop-up little mesh tents work really well for temporary ones. You can ask my mom, who works here. She's got some really great tips on that, because she was a landscaper previously, so she's got some good things like coffee grounds and cocoa timber. Those work really well. But these are, you can kind of see the difference between the first picture I showed you, those really fat baby bunnies that were 2 weeks old. This is their first few days of life. That's like less than 1 week, a couple days. Their chances of success in rehab might be less than 10%. So when you say, if you care, leave them there, it's kind of the DNR stance and the motto that we've been using. Does anybody know about when mom rabbits come back to feed the babies? Anyone know much about like their natural history? Morning and night, yeah. Dawn and dusk, they're crepuscular. So in the summertime when they're having most of their babies, it's going to be really early, like 5 a.m., and then probably not until like 9 p.m. at night. So you're not going to see them, and they're in this little shallow depression in the ground. Mom pulls out her belly fur, usually uses dry grasses and things, and she just leaves them there. And then she hops over, she kind of unburies the stuff, she lets them suckle from underneath, and then she hops away again, because she doesn't want to attract any predators to the nest by staying nearby, so she actually stays a ways away. So if you see nice fat plump bellies, those are really good. But if in doubt, you can always send a picture, and usually if you can at least show their body or their bellies, you can tell if they may have been fed or not and what condition they're in. In terms of the dogs and cats and foxes, I've got some great information over here, but also on our website about tips and tricks to keep the dog away from the nest during the time period that they're being fed by their mom. And believe it or not, from birth to development, they are actually independent in only 4 weeks. So from here to 4 weeks later, they don't want anything to do with each other. They're fully independent. They actually get really territorial. They don't live in family groups. So they're kind of funny like that. But yes. So, and oh, I should mention too, like even if there are, we know there's lots of stray cats, foxes, coyotes, etc. We unfortunately are not going to be able to save every single animal from predation. And so again, the best thing still is mom thinks it was a safe spot and we give her the chance to try it. And if you ever look up some YouTube videos of moms defending her bunny nest, there's some good ones of them like going after snakes and stuff. So they do actually defend them.
Foxes and coyotes have to eat too.
Exactly. And so, you can use that argument as well. And sometimes we'll have folks intercept the process too. And or as rehabbers, we're kind of like, oh no, we feel bad for the animal that might have, been the meal, but then we also feel bad for the animal that was also trying to get the meal. So it's a very hard, where do you kind of balance it? But anyways, if you're unsure, here's our text line. So if you ever need it, and I don't know if you want a copy of this for anyone later or anything, but that number is there if you wanted to send us a photo, or you can email us at wildlife@giveshelter.org, so you're welcome to take one of those. And then my other most common one is baby bird, way too young to be out of the nest. It can't fly, and I've touched it, the mother won't care for it anymore. Did any of you get that when you were growing up? I got it when I grew up, so
Yeah.
it's the biggest myth of wildlife rehab. I guarantee they will want their baby back. And I have it in a box. Another bird is attacking the baby, or me when I went to pick it up. Probably is the parent trying to defend her young on the ground. So this is a little nestling songbird that needs to absolutely go back up into his nest. They can't thermoregulate at that age, and they don't have enough feathers to stay warm, so mom would brood on them at night. This is a healthy fledgling robin who is absolutely ready to be out of the nest, and he's on the ground. And sometimes they're on the ground for up to 7 to 10 days naturally. And I usually like to kind of mention, why would robins be on the ground right after fledging?
They eat worms?
They eat worms. And so they need to learn how to do that. And if they don't, how are they going to be a robin? So it takes them a few days learning from their parents to figure out how to do that. But that's very different than a swallow. Barn swallow should never be on the ground, ever. They should be in their nest until the point where they are flying and they're aerial insectivores catching insects. So every species is very different, but most of your songbird species, I would say, that are insectivores or ground foragers are going to be on the ground. So. All right, I do have one more, but here, I'll just show you a cool, oh wait, I didn't get the, I'll have to show you this one instead. Renesting small mammals, because this is a cool one. This is a mouse carrying her baby all the way across, ironically, our raptor enclosures, so I don't know why she felt that was safe. But it's just kind of a really quick video to show you that the mom mice, like if we disturb one of the nests of any rodent, so this works for squirrels, this works for raccoons, it works for mice, chipmunks, they will one by one take their babies from the first nest, and they've made a backup nest somewhere, usually about 3 of them. They'll move them to another nest. So if you ever have squirrels in your attic, for example, you want to get rid of them in your house, you can, but do it in a way that you've got the ability to take them all out at once and put them right next to the entrance hole where mom would have gone in, and she will take them to a backup nest, which is really great. So if you want any tips on that, happy to share. But that's another good one for especially your rodent species.
I don't think I ever knew that.
I know, yeah, they just in case, they're just smart like that, I don't know. It's fun. It also works if you cut the tree down on accident and the squirrel babies are in there, so. If you put the squirrel babies right on top of the stump, if you happen to cut it down, Mom will go back, and that's what that video was, but I realized I didn't hook to your Wi-Fi, so. Yep. I'll leave this one here because I have a handout, but we also get a lot of calls about nuisance animals. Woodchucks digging in the backyard. Fox with mange is a big one. We have a lot of foxes with mange here in our state. It is treatable, they have to be caught, which is really difficult to do. Possums with dogs, and yeah, squirrels nesting in the attic. We're somewhere in between. Like, as rehabilitators, we're somewhere between the humane capture, humane harassment, humane eviction, and helping, but if that animal is healthy, we can't take it legally. We have to only take them if they're sick, injured, or orphaned. So if you show up at the wildlife center with a healthy woodchuck in a live trap, I have to turn you away, unfortunately, because I could lose my license. So it's one of those weird things that not everybody knows. But yeah, we want to try to harass them away from the area if you do have an animal that you don't really want in your yard, but we also try to encourage tolerance because we do also share the world with them. So we appreciate what they do. Yeah. I think that's what I have.
How do you harass ground squirrels away from you?
Those guys are really tough, actually. They're probably one of the harder ones to try to get to move on. Usually we have suggested, actually here, I do have this one up here, tips here. Things like olfactory work pretty well. Different scents that they wouldn't like, and you know how they dig their tunnels and stuff, if you can put things down there that aren't bait. I wouldn't use bait or poisons. We still get so many raptors that come in from like mouse toxicities, like, rodenticides, and they're internally bleeding from that. So really don't use those. But if you can use pepper spray, ammonia works really well. So like if you have Windex or something, you can kind of spray that in a paper towel or a rag. If you can get it to, take a stick or something, you can get it down into their hole. If you do that enough, it'll be kind of abrasive when they're breathing it in, but eventually they won't want to stick around. That can work pretty well. Sometimes human hair or dog fur works, but I have another tip, but I know you're recording it, so I won't mention it on here, but there is a really good one that works best out of all of those. And then sometimes I've heard people affected with pinwheels, like the ones that you can put in the ground and they're shiny and the wind blows them. I think they get used to those pretty fast, so I don't usually say that that's the best option. But there's also things like flaming hot squirrel seed, which is fun. It's a capsaicin, which birds can't taste, and it's a coating that they sell at like Wild Birds Unlimited and some other places. You can put that out for like squirrels and some of the rodents that would eat seeds naturally, but it's hot, right? So like if you eat spicy food, it's really, really hot. And so they're usually around your house because they're getting a good food source. But if you give them a food source that's not so great, it's not lethal, but it's not nice either necessarily. But it is an option that you could try also. So those are a couple of good ones, I think. But yeah, mostly, especially making physical changes, like take down your bird feeders for a little while. Usually that'll help to track them because they're probably there for seed or food in some form or fashion. But it also might be your neighbor's house too, so that can be really tough. Yep. Don't use glue traps either. I've had to take everything from snakes to birds to a whole bunch of other things out of glue traps. But yeah. All right, well, I think I'll leave it at there. I do have a couple of other like just fun random slides, but I think we're good because that was kind of my biggest one. My last thing that I'll just say is if you ever want to get involved or help, like ways to help in general, obviously donations for Wildlife Rehabilitators. We have a wish list. We have monetary donations for food and medical supplies. We also are building a 100-foot flight pen this year that we got a very large grant for, which I'm really excited. It'll be the first ever solar-powered flight pen. So it will be a very huge project that is starting this year into next year. And we also have folks that sponsor internships or apprentices, volunteering, and other projects. And then I will just share my really cool split screen video of the soccer being released. Because it's also a really fun one because he runs out of his carrier. And I think it's pretty neat. It's one of my favorites where he just like, he runs and then he's like, oh. He's like, oh, I'm free.
Of course, right in front of the camera too.
Anyways.
Post.
So yes, so thank you, and if anybody wants more information about other rehab centers, like I said, Cooley Region Humane Society is the next closest, and then in Dane County we also have our mammal group, the Wisconsin Wild Care folks, and otherwise there's actually not too many, it's far and few between. Eau Claire, if you're going to go up that direction, has some, And I believe there's also the Cooley Raptor Rehab, which is in Dane County. So that would be the other one. But she's not taking any birds right now because of avian influenza. So we are testing for it, so we are taking them. If you have a bird, we'll be able to help you.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you.